Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn to build a simple musical instrument. I'm very excited about this because I've been working on it for a while. The mu- the crux of this instrument would be that it's going to make the tune visual. So think of a piano. When you play a tune, everything is linear. If you have to change certain parts of the tune, you can't do that. You'll have to start over again and correct yourself. As opposed to writing a musical note on a piece of paper, you would be able to visualize it. You can see, you can go back to any part of the tune and make corrections. So we'll try to merge these two concepts where you can still create a tune like you would on a piano, but go back and be able to edit any part of the tune if you desire to do so. Since I've been working on this for a bit, I have the code over here, which we'll be using a lot. So let's get started. Let's go to Xcode and create a new project. Single view application, let's call it make music. Rest everything is the default. Next, create. And once we do that, let's jump into the main storyboard. As usual, I'm going to make this a size that I can work with. Quickly, I need some elements on the screen. So the first, we learned how to use the stack view. So let's use that today. Storyboard. All right, I need a horizontal stack view. Let me place it here. Resize this one. And next I want to add some button to it. So here's a button. Let's call this play. Then I want two more buttons. I'll explain what I'll do with those in a bit. Let me call this 1. Let me call this 2. And I need a label. When we are done with this label is going to show you what note is being currently played. Let's create that, and I need one final button. Let's call this clear. Back to the stack view. Oh, that's the button. Let me select. So all these, let me move all of our elements inside the stack view. That's how you do it if you have to get back to your stack. And with the stack view selected, let me give it some breathing room. The elements are sufficiently far apart. I'm going to add some constraints. I want this to be horizontally in the container. And I'm just going to pin it to the two sides. Zero. There. Now that's going to be pinned to the two sides. Add. Perfect. So our basic buttons that we need for this app is ready. I'm going to quickly test this on iPhone 6s. Let's bring up that simulator. I'm going to change the window size, scale it to 50% so that we can view it. So what we are trying to do here is create some buttons that's going to help us manipulate the musical instrument that we are building. And I'm loading this up just to make sure everything looks fine. All right, this looks fine. We have our basic buttons. And let me stop this. Here's the stack. What I want to do is make some breathing room on top. So let me add one more constraint of 15 pixels or 15 pixels from the top. All right, so that should take care of that. Next, we want a scroll view, and this is the first time I believe you're going to learn about how to use scroll views. And so let's see, this is a scroll view, and again, same idea here, align horizontally in the container, and I want to pin it, let's say 20 pixels from the top, and whatever we have, I'm going to keep that -4 from each side, add those 3 constraints. All right, so that should give us the scroll view. Now, rest of the things we are going to do in code. So for that, let me first bring up the assistant editor over here. And as we are familiar, we are going to wire this up to the code. What I want is, I want to be able to change the content of this label, which will, I'm going to call it label note. So that will always display the note that is being played. So once I have that, what else? This button, I want to change the text of it to show play when it's playing, and when I want to play, and stop when we have to do that. So we have those 2 outlets defined, and I don't want the outlets for these. That's perfectly fine. And from the scroll view, I'm going to want to add things to the scroll view in code. So let's call it scroll view for notes. And there. So we have our outlets that are ready. Now once we have that, let me close out of this window and move to code. Let's also, all right, so what do we do next? Let's go back to the code that I was working on. We need to make sure we need the sound files. So you can see over here, I got the sound files from this link. If you click on it, it's going to take you to this website, and here's someone who is creating a piano app. So if that was our goal, we would download the image files, wire it up to the sound files that we are downloading, etc. This is a good tutorial actually. I'll share the link if you want to just see how you'll be building a basic piano. This is a really good tutorial, and it'll give you a lot of information. But you can see a lot of things are being repeated here in code. We'll avoid all that. We are going to make our code super lean and use a lot of loops, and we are going to do it in a clean way. So that would be some difference, but nevertheless, this is a fantastic tutorial to learn how to build a piano. You can see this link would let you download the image and sound files. We are mostly interested in the sound files, and I clicked on it and already have it downloaded over here. You can see that's a zip file it's going to download. So since we have that, let me bring up Xcode and sound. I'm going to drag and drop this folder here. Make music, copy items, finish. All right, and as you can see, it has a bunch of MP3 files. And now our idea would be that we would create some controls in the app, clicking on which it's going to play these sound files. All right, let's get back to code. The next thing I want to do is actually create some variables. So the first one that I would create is these two variables. Okay, so what is this line of code doing here? It is creating an array, and in the array it has the name of each of the note, and that will correspond to all of this, as you can see, right? And that's what we are going to use to play our musical instrument. So that's just an array that holds a bunch of strings which corresponds to the notes. Then we also need a few configuration variables, and I'll explain what we are going to use this for. This is a timer that we are going to use to do something on a periodic interval. Here is a variable that's indicating tag count start. I'll explain what this is. This is the total number of controls or buttons that we are going to put in. This could be 50, 100, how many ever you want. So if you want a musical instrument with, let's say, 10 buttons, I would have made this 10. You'll see that we are going to put in around 40 buttons, or you'll see why I'm calling it a slider in a bit. And this is a variable that is going to describe the state of our instrument. It basically is going to switch between either play or stop. So when it's playing, it'll be in play mode. When it's stopped, it'll be in stop mode. And here, this is just one other variable that I need for some purpose, and we'll get to it when we get into the meat of the code. So that's that. Here you can see that it's giving an error. That is because this is an array of the audio players. So each of this sound file is going to be held in this array of audio players, and it's not recognizing it. That is because I'm going to need this file, import audio video foundation. So let's bring it in, and then that should make sure that this error goes away. You can see that because the concept of or the definition of audio video players is in this library. So we have that library in. And this might be the first time you are seeing how you would import a library that's available to you and then start using elements from that particular library. All right, so we have all these variables. Ignore these two variables for now. And the first thing what we are going to do here is we are going to load up all the sounds in that audio player that we just saw, right? So let me copy this piece of code and I'll explain what it does. So on load, the first thing I'm going to do is, you can see for key in piano keys, so it's going to iterate through this. So this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is going to loop for each of the entry in this array. And here I'm saying I'm creating a piano sound URL, and that URL is nothing but file URL with path, and it's going to use sound/key. Now you need to know that key comes from this, right, which is an entry in piano keys. So what it's saying is it's the type MP3, and you can find it here. That's what it's saying, right? So C3, so it's going to go look for sound/C3 type MP3. That's what this piece of code does. And then you're creating an audio player, and you are going to add that to that audio instance of that AV audio player. You are adding this URL, right? So it's going to create an audio player for, if let's say if this was C3, it'll be C3, and then audio player dot prepare to play, that allows that makes it ready to be played, and you are adding it to this array that we earlier created, right? So simple enough. Iterating through all this, picking it up from here, creating an audio player, making it ready to play, and adding it to the array. So that's the code we have so far. Next up, we have the scroll view, and what this piece of code is going to do is, see, our name is different. I named it this. So this scroll view is not long enough to hold all the 40 buttons that we want, or sliders that we want, and hence we are going to make it long. That's how you can start using a scroll view. If you want to make it long, and then it just enables you to scroll. That's how most of the apps you use, like Facebook or anything else, when you see it scrolling, they're using a scroll view. Coming back here, so here we are making the height of that scroll view much longer than the screen size itself, right? That's how you'll be able to scroll through it. Next, let's see. Now what you want to do is something interesting. You are going to use this piece of long code to create all the sliders automatically. And why sliders, I'll explain that in a second. And the name here is this. So let's see what we are trying to do. Let's try to add some sliders programmatically. Total sliders, here I told you we want 40. So this loop is going to be executed 40 times. What I'm saying is where I want the slider to begin, what would be the length of that slider. All this is 3 lines, is the geometry of the slider. And then I'm saying the minimum value is -1, the maximum value is 12. So that lets us play the 12 notes, right? So if you can almost visualize the slider. If I'm sliding it and if I stop at number 4, it's going to play note number 4. So that's the intent. And then it's continuous, tint color blue, value, this is the starting value. So this is redundant. We want continuous to be false. And tag, add target. All right. So what this piece of code is doing is, every time you change the value of the slider, you need a function to be fired, and that is this function. And we'll write that function up in a second, and we'll tell it what exactly to do. But that's what this piece of code is doing. And then you also want, so slider as a control, you have to hold it and then slide it across the screen. That's a slider. But here, since we are making a musical instrument, we want it to be more like a piano. You want to be able to tap anywhere on the slider, and the slider should automatically move to that point that you tapped, so that you don't have to like click, drag, and leave. You just tap where you want, and that becomes the current value. So that is the gesture we will be adding here. And how you do that is you create a UI tap gesture recognizer. And when you say that when a user types on somewhere on that slider, call this function. So there are two functions that we need to write now. One is when someone taps on somewhere on the slider, call this function. And this is whenever anyone changes the value, right? You click and drag and you leave it, the value gets changed and this function gets called. So that's what we are doing. So this is something very interesting where you are now creating controls programmatically and adding it to the UI. That's why if you go here, you won't see any control at all. But now if I execute this code, you would, in theory, see a bunch of sliders. Let's quickly try that. I haven't written the rest of the code and there might be errors, but won't hurt to try. So build succeeded. All right, so that's what I'm talking about. You can see all the buttons and now all these sliders. There would be 40 of them and you can scroll through those, right? So that is pretty neat. That's exactly what we are attempting to do. As you can see, you no longer have to create this by hand one by one and add it. You just did all of that programmatically. Now what happens if I move this somewhere? The program is going to crash probably because it's going to go looking for that function and it's not going to find it. And there you go. That's a demonstration of how your app crashes. All right. So let's get back to coding. All right, so that is it. Now I would like to write these two pieces of function and show you what it does. The first is this function is called when you drag the slider. Easy enough. Let's get that in. So you can see the value here. The name is the same, right? Value change. So this function gets called. And when that function gets called, you need to now make music, right? That's what it's trying to look for this function, which we will write up. Let's first do that. Function make a sound. So remember all the audio player we had loaded and it was all ready to play. Maybe it's time to play that. So when you change the value of that slider, this function gets called, and in this function, what we are doing is we are rounding out the value of the slider because it's going to be like 1.8, 2.6, but that's no good because we are working with integers here. This is 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this function is going to round it and call this function with that rounded value, make sound. And what make sound is doing here, if you watch closely, is it's going into the array of audio players we had created. It's picking out the particular number that we are sending it, and then it's resetting it to current time as 0 so that it tells you play at the beginning of the file, and then just hit play. So it's going to just play, and further this label that we had added is going to show you what that value is. So let's see if it works. Let's play this. And there you go. And it'll work with all of our sliders. Again, this program just now crashed. That is because, remember, we have to write one more piece of code, because if the tap gesture gets triggered, which I probably accidentally did, it's not going to find this piece of this function. So let's bring that function in. Um, and that is this function, and see what that does. All right. So when you tap somewhere, this is a bunch of code. First it gets the gesture recognizer and extracts the slider out of it. And from that slider, we are figuring out what point you tapped on. And then you create a position of the slider. And you get all the parameters of the slider and where you tapped on it. And then you assign the new value of that to the slider, right? So that's what this piece of code is doing. Uh, you can look at it line by line, but that's the gist of it. And then once it has set the slider to that particular value, then you can see it's doing exactly the same thing that we did when you moved it, right? So this whole piece of code is setting that slider to that particular value on where you tapped it. And then this piece of code does the rest, which is play music. I'm going to make one small change here. I'm going to make this. I'm going to try and pin this to the bottom without leaving any space. Just so that the control then leaves no space at the bottom, no matter what the size of your phone is. Okay, getting back to code. So that will take care of whether the slider is tapped or dragged and it's playing music. So you have your basic instrument ready. If you wanted to uh, click around, it's going to let you compose a tune, but once you composed it, if you wanted to play it, let's see what you would be doing. This function is going to help us, and that uses a timer, because once you hit play, you want it to sequentially go from top to bottom and play that music you just composed. So this is the play button pressed function, and this is the timer function. So let's quickly build that out. For that, what I'm going to do is, let's make some space here, go back to our main storyboard, bring up the assistant editor. I want, when the play is hit, button play pressed, right button. Okay, I want it to be an action. This is the button, touch up inside, connect. So you can write your code inside that. And while we are here, I'm going to also wire up these buttons. It's an action, button 1 pressed, connect, button 2 pressed. It's an action, UI button, connect, and the last button, which is clear. Pressed. Action, right, let's jump back into code. And let's look at this. Once you press the play button, you want these things to happen. First, you're killing the timer. You are changing the state if if it is play, you are starting a timer and then calling the TikTok function and changing the state to stop, right? So that then the button says stop, and if you hit stop, this block would get fired, which is stop instrument. So you can see there are a couple of functions here that we need to write up. One is TikTok, and one is this stop instrument that it's not able to find. So let's do that. I'll bring in this function and explain it. In this function, what you are doing is, all right, you are referencing what you have on the screen, picking it up with a particular tag count so that it starts from 0 and keep progressing all the way. It doesn't actually start from 0 because some of the buttons and labels that you added would have those tags as 0 already. And since for the 40 ones that we have added, what I have done is I have given it the tag number starting from 1000. So that's the tag count start. So all these 40 sliders that you have on the screen starts from 1001, 1002, 1003, etc. It's just easy to reference it and not confuse it with some of the elements that we want that you created using the storyboard, and they would have the same tag number. So to avoid that confusion, anything that I added programmatically, I just started it from 1000. It's an arbitrary number. You can start it from any number. But over here, you are then using that tag count, you are making the sound, you're moving, you're changing the slider color, so it changes color as it moves, and then you increment the tag count, and then this function keeps repeating, right? Because it's on a timer, right? And it will just keep repeating. If it reaches the end, then it just resets to start of the counter and then keeps going again and again and again. That's what this timer does. And there's one more function that's missing, that's stop instrument. So function that resets everything. Let me bring that in. So after make sound, let me add it. It's just going to this function is going to stops play. This is the function we were looking for, but that's fine. Okay, so this function has come in, which invalidates the timer, resets the label, changes the play button state. It goes through all the sliders and makes it the default color, resets the tag count to the start of tag counter, etc. So this is basically stopping and resetting the music. So it'll just stop. And reset function is we can use this. What this does is it brings all the slider values back to -1. So this will just stop it, but it will leave all the slider where it's at, and this will bring back all the sliders to its start position. So that's what these two functions are doing, and that makes our code complete so far, and we can see what we have been talking through. Let me play it. So let's try to see the scrolls, and let's try to make a tune. then I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good at music, but and now let's try to hit play. That's what it does. And I can always stop and then go again. And this label is telling you the notes. Now, see when I hit. Okay, when we hit clear, we have to wire up this button. The idea would be to clear out these tunes. And the reason why we added 1 and 2 is if you want to preload a couple of tunes so that you don't have to compose music every time, that would help you do that. So let's write up those functions. Going back to my pre-written code over here, this is what hitting the clear button, we wired it up here. So that's going to reset the instruments. And when you hit this 1 and 2, you want to preload some tunes. That's all it does. So for that, let's define these two variables. And then on the top, I'm going to add those. And let's get to what happens when the first button is pressed and what happens when the second button is pressed. So this is the first button. So what you're doing is you're resetting the instrument, you're resetting the count, you are going through the notes array. You're separating it out by the space because it's a string. So this is not an array yet. As you can see, it's a string separated by spaces, and all you're doing is now using that space to break it out into an array. So this is an array, and then you iterate through that array and just set the slider value to the values you find in there, right? And to find the numeric value, you are going to look in piano keys and use index of. So for that particular value you are getting from the string, you are getting a numeric value from here, which you're going to set the slider to. And that's it. So that's what happens when you do 1, and it's the exact same code if you want to do it for 2. There you go. So that should wire everything up. Let me see if any other function that I've written here that needs to be brought in. Nothing I can see. So that should complete our player. Let's try to fire it up. All right, let's create our tune. And you can stop and you can clear. If you use to choose one of these buttons, you can see there's a preloaded tune and you can play that. And if I do 1, there's a familiar tune. There you go. So I had a lot of fun building this out and actually using this option over here to add it to my iPhone and take it on the go with me and compose some tunes and play it. Hope you have as much fun trying to build this. What we learned in this episode was using music files, playing sound, using the scroll view, and a lot of other things. Some of the things we went through real fast, like arrays and line-by-line details, but looking through the code that I'll share with you, you should be able to learn more. And that brings us to the creation of this musical instrument. Hopefully in one of the future episodes, we'll take it to the next level, add some automation, add some further features, etc. But for now, hopefully some musicians can take this for a spin and let us know whether this is useful, or any feedback they might have for us to improve this further. Thank you, and looking forward to the next lesson.